uncontainedanxietycenter.com.
I thought I'd just join the discussion today because you wanted to talk about barriers to recovery.
Yes, I sure did. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I'll just, I guess, give you a bit of context first. So the main symptoms I've been dealing with in this relapse has been the dizziness, unsteadiness, the jelly legs, like weak, numb legs, wobbly legs. That's been my main symptom this time round.
Mm-hmm.
And the fatigue, of course. So it's mostly like those three things. But yeah, I guess I'll start talking a bit about the barriers that I've identified. I've written down like three. So yeah, the first one I think is like to do with all the negative memories, like just from the previous struggle that I had.
Yeah.
So from like October 2015 to 2018, the first time around, because it took me like 3 years to fully recover. And then what happened was last spring, due to hay fever, it like re-triggered vertigo and fatigue, and I ended up being bedbound, housebound for about 3 months, so the whole of spring, and that kind of resulted in like a full relapse for the severe GAD and agoraphobia.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like the negative memories from like the years from the first 3 years that I struggled. It's just like kind of causing me to believe, like at the back of my mind, like what if this like never improves this time, and like what if I'm stuck here living this like limited kind of life.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just that the negative memories basically from like the first, like just the whole struggle basically. I think that's like the first barrier.
Sure, you bet. That's a good one. Yeah.
Yep. And then the second one, I think just because like I said, I was bedbound from the vertigo, I just had a lot of time to like process everything as well, like so just realizing like the grief from like all the lost times, like the lost time opportunities over the past 6 years basically, because I just turned 30 like last week, so it just like hit me like how behind I feel in life compared to like everyone else my age.
Yeah.
So yeah, just the grief basically, that is the second barrier.
Yeah.
And then the third and last one I identified was like just having all this time now to just focus on recovery and like not having anything else to return to. And it feels like not really sure what to do as well, like after recovery too.
Gotcha.
So
sure.
they're just the main three things I've kind of identified.
No, those are good ones, and they're common, absolutely, yes. Especially the negative memories from a previous struggle. And if we do have a relapse of symptoms or a stressor, then of course what runs through our mind is, well, what if I return back to that condition again? And then what if this time it can't get better? That's a common fear that we hear quite often. Yeah, I certainly understand that.
Yeah, that's like what I've been dealing with.
Yeah.
And it's not like I don't know like all the information, because it's like I've recovered before and like I have your website and everything, and I'm working with Grace right now at the moment. So yeah, it's like I know what to do, but there's still just those negative memories, I guess. It just kind of just makes you doubt that you will recover, I guess.
Yeah.
And it just makes it harder to stay motivated as well.
Yeah, the last thing you mentioned here too, it's hard to stay motivated, especially after a setback, when we have already made progress once and we're back again. And often when the recovery is so long, it just seems like we're doing our work forever. And because progress can be so slow at times, it just seems like, what's the point? Is this ever going to happen? So yeah, those are all common ones for sure. Yeah, you bet. I thought what we'd do is maybe have everyone sort of raising ones that we haven't talked about at the beginning, and then we can identify some of the top ones and just talk about ways to resolve them, if that sounds okay to everybody.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay. Anybody else want to chime in with some of the barriers you think to recovery? I've got a list here myself, but I'd like to hear other people's opinions.
I have two, but that's okay. Yeah, you go ahead.
Sweet. Can you hear me okay? The audio coming through all right?
Yep, very well.
Yeah, hey, so I mean, I've been in recovery for about 4 years now. I'm sure there's someone at home that hears that and it's full blown like, hey, like 4 years, that's a long time. I don't know if I can do that like don't worry. Like, trust me, a good majority of that was all due to my own self-sabotage. Gosh, yeah, it sounds like a long time, but I mean, if you look at the timeline of my own recovery, you'll kind of see why it's been stalled for the last 2 or so years. I guess just kind of breaking down the timeline, right? So in August of 2018, that's kind of when I started the whole anxiety center program. That was just a few months after I had my panic attack, which kind of led into my hyperstimulation. So August of 18, started anxiety center, stuck with it for 5 months. January of 2019, I entered a stressful relationship and I started weightlifting for 6 months. So that in itself is obviously going to either slow down, stall, or even reverse recovery. August of 2019, I moved away to college. That in itself is stressful. I partied and drank for 9 months. That is obviously pretty counterproductive. May of 2020, obviously all the lockdowns and all that started happening. I kind of used that as a good opportunity to, hey, let me get my recovery and all that dialed in. So, I stayed dedicated to the recovery strategies for 10 months. Within that 10-month timeline, I did see some symptom improvement. Lo and behold, the college semester starts rolling back around March of 21, started partying and drinking again. Hardly any deep relaxation, which I think was a big one, as well as some strenuous hobbies more than once a week. And then even as recently as January of 22, I started worrying due to low self-esteem fears. I started weightlifting for a month because I thought my previous stall in weightlifting was due to the stressful relationship. Turned out that was not true at all. I thought, hey, if the symptoms get a little worse, I'll be fine. And lo and behold, they were pretty much so bad, I wasn't even able to do my own homework or test assignments. I had to get them pushed back. They definitely made me feel pretty bad, so much so that my symptoms of impending doom and derealization, which I have constantly 24/7 for the last 4 years, now felt worse. And it was pretty much just one of those things where, like the beginning of this month, I was just like, hey, you know what? I'm just going to put the yardstick on the ground. I'm not going to drink alcohol or just do any recreational drugs. As far as the whole, I guess my time in college kind of coming down, might as well just kind of focus on more realistic goals. As well as just kind of doing deep relaxation 2 to 3 times a day until I actually recover. So, I mean, I guess to kind of go back on it, 4 years sounds like a long time, but if you actually kind of see that out of the 48 months I've been hyperstimulated, I've only ever spent 10 or so of the months consistently applying the recovery strategies, and of which in those 10 months I did see minor improvement. Jen, right now I'm pretty much at the point where I am finishing college. It definitely seems like I've been pretty wishy-washy with my recovery for 4 years. I pretty much felt not as ideal for the whole time, whereas I feel like I could have just been completely dedicated for 2 or so years, however long that may be, and then probably be honestly completely recovered by now, or at least pretty close to it, and then just enjoy the stimulating things that life offers without having to feel any symptoms. So,
yeah,
I mean, that's pretty much the main, I guess kind of going back to the, the previous individual that had identified barriers, I mean, big ones for me. I guess up until recently, I have been not doing enough deep relaxation, obviously partying, inward focused thinking. I'm still working on this one, as well as just being irritable. I have heard you mention in the past that, at the end of the day, whether it's anger or stress, you're still releasing stress hormones and doing that. I definitely attribute part of being irritable to hyperstimulation, but it's something that I guess I need to manage just as good as I do when it comes to containing. So that's pretty much where I'm at with that.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for the update. And, going through the college years is really difficult to focus on recovery because college itself is stressful, and yet you still want to participate in everything else that's going around, which is, stimulating and so on and so forth. So it can be very difficult at that time for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
You bet. Yeah.
Just a couple barriers for me. It seems like, that I've been working at this for a while and, getting better. And then my setbacks have always involved medications, rather not necessarily psychiatric medications. In fact, just an antibiotic threw me way back into an even worse, situation that I, was once in before. But, I would just want to kind of bring up that normal medications, which you have listed on your website, over the counter or even prescribed medications, can throw me back, way back.
Mm.
And right now I'm trying to taper off Depakote, which there's not a lot of information on how to do that. I did go to my pharmacist, and they had absolutely no help. He kind of looked at me like, I don't know, just ask your doctor. And then I asked my doctor, well, just, the typical rapid taper thing. So I'm kind of going through that, but that's just kind of one I wanted to bring up too, was, medications over the counter and prescribed medications as well.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the reasons that, we aren't advocates of psychotropic medications for anxiety, because then you just add another layer of recovery. That means coming off. It means breaking the psychological addiction if one exists, breaking the emotional one if one exists, breaking the physical one if one exists. So you just add that to the challenges of overcoming anxiety. The thing about psychotropic medications is that they can help some people with symptom reduction for a while. And if that's the case and a person starts coming off and the symptoms start to creep up, the first likelihood is to try to go back on it because they've got symptom relief and they don't want to have to deal with it. And so then you have to break the emotional and psychological addiction, and which then forces them to have to learn how to contain their anxiousness, have to learn how to tolerate the increase in symptoms, and learn to be patient as the natural recovery strategies work to bring success. If a person eliminates that whole piece, obviously you're going to recover quicker. So there's plus and minuses to medications. We just find that the medication adds another layer of complexity to becoming anxiety condition free. So some of the other ones that I've identified, obviously the big one that I see is uncontained worry and anxiety. And that'll fit in with the one you mentioned earlier, Christine, about the negative memories. When we experience success, that's great, and we're happy and we feel free. And if we aren't free for a long period of time, like say 4 or 5 years, if we're free for about a year or two, and then all of a sudden something throws us into a setback where our symptoms start raising up, and that could be a stressful circumstance, it could be a medical condition, could be a treatment with medication or a surgery or something or other, and there's some stress associated with it. And then we get beyond that. Well, of course, that stress is going to have a toll, and it usually surfaces after that stress is over. Symptoms start to escalate, and then we start to question our recovery. And though the uncontained anxiousness about that can certainly spiral us back up into hyperstimulation in a hurry, because worry is just one of those behaviors that can really stir the nervous system up and in a hurry, especially if we're worried about something 24/7. It doesn't take very long for that body to become hyperstimulated. So uncontained anxiety and worry is probably one of the biggest barriers to, first off, overcoming anxiety disorder and remaining anxiety disorder free over the years. And I understand there's another part of that, and that other part of that is unextinguished fears. When we go through anxiety disorder, we establish a lot of fears, a lot of us do, and a lot of negative memories associated with those fears and how we felt, and we didn't like being there, so that registers as a threat. So as we make recovery, that threat sits at the back of our mind. Well, what if I can't do this? And what if I can only go so far? And what if this isn't going to work for me? All that what ifing is that uncontained anxiety worry I just mentioned previously. And that will keep us stuck, sure than anything. So as we're moving through recovery, I know if we haven't been through recovery before, if we're moving through it for the first time, we don't have experience to say that it's going to work. So we have all of these fears in the back of our mind that can keep us stuck. This is where it's really important to trust in those who've been down this road before, to lean on their successes and confidence as you build your own. Because as you know, overcoming anxiety disorder takes a lot of time to get that body unhyperstimulated for sure, but it also takes a lot of time to build the confidence that we're going to be okay. So we have the first three is uncontained worry and anxiety. Second, unextinguished fears. And of course, the third, which is a really, really common one, is unidentified and unaddressed underlying factors. This will keep us stuck more than anything. I'll give you a few examples. While physical recovery is quite straightforward when you think about it, even though it takes like forever, if we realize our symptoms are just symptoms of stress, and if we want to get rid of our symptoms, all we have to do is reduce our stress and do it consistently and for long enough for the body to recover. There really isn't much more to it than that. Yes, we have to extinguish some of the fears about our symptoms, be long lasting. What if I have to live life dizzy for the rest of my life? What if I have to live life with this twitching or trembling? Whichever symptom you latch onto is a threat to you. We still have to work at extinguishing that fear. But if we just get our stress down and contain our anxiousness there, the body's going to recover in just a matter of time. But it's going to be the unidentified, unaddressed underlying factors that's going to sabotage recovery most of the time. For example, if we're really good at level 1 recovery, we've accepted our symptoms and we're just working at stress reduction. We're not stressing about our symptoms any longer. But let's say we have low self-esteem issues, and so whenever we go into social settings, our anxiety goes through the roof. Well, that social setting, exposure to it, is going to keep the body stressed, which is going to delay recovery. Or if we're perfectionists, and if we're doing work and we're stressing about being perfect about things, stress is going to come from there. That's going to sabotage our recovery. Or another aspect to this is being in an unhealthy relationship. If we're in a lopsided relationship where we're the submissive person, being in that unhealthy relationship is going to sabotage our recovery efforts, because the stress coming from that is going to be sufficient to stall everything, and sometimes even so significant that it sets us back. So those are some of the main ones. And then, of course, we have, and I know this is going to sound kind of odd, and I don't mean it to sound this way, but an important barrier to recovery is not taking ownership for our anxiety and recovery. And I'll just kind of unpack this a bit. So many times, because our materials are fairly direct, some people say, well, are you blaming me for my anxiety? It's not that we're blaming people for anxiety, but we have to own the cause of it. If we don't own the fact that we're creating it through our behaviors, we're not going to get better. And a lot of times our backgrounds will disable us, and we get into a learned helplessness situation where we perceive ourselves as the victim, and therefore anxiety has captured us rather than us creating anxiety. Because if we don't take ownership of our creating it, then we're not going to do anything to overcome it. We'll always stay stuck. So it's important to say, you know what? Yeah, I'm here. I didn't set up my circumstances to make me anxious. I understand that, my life circumstances did that, and, the upbringing and so on and so forth did that. But I'm the one creating it for me. So I need to stop creating it for me so that I can reduce my stress and get my body back on track, which also comes down to taking ownership for recovery. If you want to recover, this work we got to do. And I know, there are some anxious people who just want their anxiety condition to be fixed. And it comes from a learned helplessness background. A lot of times overprotected people will have that mindset, well, just fix me. Tell me that, 4 or 5 things I can do and I'll do it to get better. But as everybody probably on this call knows, that recovery is work. And it's dogged work, day after day, stuff we have to go after. Containment, it's identifying those unaddressed underlying factors and making behavioral change so that we can set ourselves free for good. So those are just some of them. And of course, then we've got the not living an authentic life. A lot of us, we are kind of products of our circumstances, and we end up in life not based on what we want to do, but based on what we thought we needed to do. And so even though we're addressing our symptoms and hyperstimulation through level 1 recovery, and even though we're dealing with our behaviors from level 2 recovery aspect, a lot of anxiety still comes from feeling like we're not living our authentic self. And so for me personally, that was a big piece of my lasting recovery, is moving away from what wasn't working for me and taking the risk and moving into what I really wanted to do. Even though it may not work, financially or from a success standpoint, at least if a person is doing what they love to do, they're going to be way happier than someone who just feels trapped in their life circumstance. Then we have another aspect, which is external oppression, and that come from a war situation, conflict, can come from living in a dictatorial environment, some of those things, because again, when we're continually oppressed, we have to try to cope with that. And so that's a common one, not so much in the free countries, but more so in the countries that are controlled. Then another aspect we have is living an unbalanced life. While we may understand anxiety recovery from a level 1 perspective and a level 2 perspective, we might just live an unbalanced life where all we're doing is working and working and working and working, maybe because we have a driven, a component to our underlying factors. We have a driven behavioral component that drives us to work and work and work and achieve and achieve and achieve and achieve, which means we don't live a balanced life. I mean, everything's focused on one aspect. Well, what happened to relaxation? What happened to enjoying the simple things? What happened to, fulfilling relationships? They get stuck by the wayside. So that's another barrier we often see, more so in people who are doing level 2 recovery work, but haven't gone through everything just yet. And as Christine, you mentioned, the negative memories is certainly a big part of that, with those old fears that are in there. And again, the medications as well will complicate things. So those are some of the ones that I quickly jotted down this morning. And I just wanted to get your comments on that. What do you think of all that?
Jim, that's that inward focused thinking drive you nuts. I mean, you talk in the website about make a hash mark every time. I'm like, there isn't enough paper in the house.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
But yeah, the inward focused thinking. I wrote down stuff, and that was number 3. Yeah, inward focused thinking, being terrified of symptoms.
Yeah.
And then I also put not being compassionate. This is something Stacy and I have talked about quite a bit. Learning to be compassionate with myself,
Mm-hmm.
And that played out for me in, why can't you get it together? There's a pandemic going on. You should be at work. You should be working. You should be helping out. Lots of people, pull your big girl panties up, get big, get over it,
Yeah.
And I had to stop doing that and give myself compassion and grace. And I still have to. And also no support.
Yep.
I mean, family and friends, they say stuff that, Jim, I mean, they say that I've had at least 3, maybe 4 friends tell me I need to go and have not exorcism, but like a prayer for demonic release.
Yeah.
And then I've had, that really upset me.
Yeah.
Especially when it was just, one after another, that kind of freaks me out. And then also I had some of them medication, why can't you just get on medication? And one of the worst panic attacks I ever had was one of the doctors from work called me and just worked me over the coals, Cymbalta, if you just get on Cymbalta,
Yeah. Yeah.
I did have dizziness, but I have a lot more pain than, oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of pain. And in fact, on one of the articles you posted not that long ago about esophageal spasms, you put extreme pain. I wanted to erase that and put excruciating pain.
Yes.
I almost went to the hospital over those. I was on my way to the car in the middle of the, many a time, just like, oh my God,
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, in the loneliness of recovery, which is like good and bad, like the isolation. I don't want to say isolation because I do go to the grocery store and that kind of stuff, but I'm pretty picky and choosy about what I do because I just can't deal with the stimulation,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the kind of solitude, you talk a lot in the website about how you walked a lot during that time and just trying to figure all this out in my mind and the unresolved trauma.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's actually an important barrier to recovery, is that unresolved trauma. I mean, that's part of the underlying factors, but trauma is a big part of why we struggle. When you look at the statistics, I think it's, 50% of anxious people have trauma in their past. And that trauma can come in many forms. Some have severe trauma. Some people just have horrendous backgrounds. So as you're focusing on level 1 and level 2 recovery, that trauma is still there. Hopefully level 2 is going to be addressed. The trauma is going to be addressed, but that is a big barrier for sure, because it affects a large part of who we think we are and how we interact with others and where trust is. Yeah.
Yeah, Stacy said I scored in like the top 10% of people he's worked with.
Oh. That's heartbreaking to hear that you have to go through that growing up. Yeah.
He said he can't figure out. This made me cry when he talked about this. He said he can't figure out how I lasted so long.
Yeah. Well, you're a tough woman, right? You've had to build that resiliency to get through these things. Yeah.
But I think that's at times good and bad.
Yeah, there's definitely a plus minus to that, you bet. Yeah. And a lot of times we only build resilience by having to endure difficulty. But still, when you think of that little child you were, the things you had to go through, it just, breaks my heart to know that happens. Yeah.
Yeah. And the bad, and what's really hard for me to watch is, my siblings are either dead or mentally ill.
Yeah.
And so, it's just like, oh my gosh, how. Anyway, but probably just like the day-to-day stuff is like the inward thinking, because I was kind of laughing today. The inward focus, obsession, compulsion.
Yeah.
But, 3 months ago, I was on this call talking about how I got my period and it was gushy, and now I'm supposed to take a break and have a period and no period came. So I got to call them and say, well, what do you want me to do now?
Oh my, yeah.
It's just obsessing and like about 1,500 times a day saying, Marguerite, you're okay. You're okay. They got you a little too cleaned out. You're fine.
Yeah.
Nothing is wrong. You don't need medical help right now. Like trying to bring myself. I don't know. I try to just bring myself into the right now, the next 5 minutes, right? I don't know. Is that what you tell people to do in these situations or?
Well, there's a good and bad with mindfulness, as they call it. That's, overall it means staying in the moment. It's because when you think of anxiety, or actually overall, we live in 3 different compartments. We live in the past with regret, sometimes guilt. We live in the future with anxiety, worrying about what's coming. And we live in the present, focusing on the things we do. And most of the times when we have challenging backgrounds, we spend most of our time in either the past or in the future, and very little in the moment. And so mindfulness is supposed to direct our attention away from our worries, putting it on the present, because if we're dealing with the facts, we can see the facts. We don't have to imagine what's going on, which is going to reduce anxiety. The problem with mindfulness, there are situations where being focused in the moment can actually create anxiety or more anxiety for different people. And so there's a really fine line of how you spend the time in the moment. But spending time in the moment, you look at children, those little wonderful beings, who are so focused on what's right in front of them. Their whole attention is there. They rarely worry about tomorrow unless they've come from a difficult background. But most of the time, they just focus on what they do. So there's very little anxiety there because they can see what's going on. They're entertained. Their mind is focused on the pleasant and the joys. Well, as adults, we need to sort of cultivate some of that again, where we focus our attention on the moment. Because one of the things I love, what Marilyn talks about anxiety is so many people don't focus on the facts. They focus on the what ifs. What if this, and what if that, and what if this? And so what we want to do from an anxious perspective, we want to start focusing on the facts, not on what we can imagine. What are the facts? For example, we often get questions by people who are waiting for a medical diagnosis. And so an anxious person is going to imagine all the worst case scenarios, where someone who's not anxious is going to say, well, I'll wait to see what the doctor says. So, of course, the anxious person is going to be stressed, by the time they get the results, whereas the non-anxious person, they're just living the normal life. So we have to be more like that by saying, you know what, I'm going to focus on the facts. At this particular time, I don't know what's going on. I'm going to leave it there, and I'm not going to imagine all the worst case scenarios.
Right.
And so the same holds true with inward focused thinking. Inward focused thinking becomes a behavioral pattern we use to cope with the life challenges as we grew up with them. And of course, then that becomes our standard way of doing things. So we have to look back and say, no, there's a lot of people who live their lives just fine and safe, and they don't inward focus all the time. So I have to start changing my behavior, recognize that this is something, especially if that inward focus has an anxious component to it. I have to move away from that and start changing the behavior by saying, I'm just going to focus on what I know, going to focus on today. When you, again, think of anxiety, there is a good value in being anxious. And when I say that, I mean, anxiety is supposed to alert us to a danger that we need to take care of. And so if you have a medical thing going on, rather than worrying about it and yet not talking to a doctor, that's not helpful, because the alarm is supposed to get us to move towards a resolve. So if we have something that's alerted our attention, we want to go talk to the doctor and let the doctor figure it out. But if we've done that, there's no point in worrying about it. Let the doctor do his job, and we're just going to keep ourselves contained. So there's different ways of coping with an unknown that's going to keep us healthier than anxious.
Yeah, I tell myself, if you have questions, I don't look anything up on the internet ever.
Yeah.
Even when I was still nursing, I would only look up what I absolutely needed to look up, with a patient or whatever. But
yeah.
I tell myself, okay, you're not going to sit here and get negative and get all up worried. You know what? If you have questions about your health, you need to make an appointment. It's not worth making an appointment. It's not worth worrying about.
Yep, totally. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, and then just how long it takes to get better. Yeah. But Stacy did help me the last time I talked to him. He said, if you're this old and you've had this probably your entire life since birth, and, you've only really been working at it for 0.001% of your life. I mean, so it's kind of like, well, that kind of makes sense, I mean, it just takes a tremendous amount of time to get better.
Yeah, it does. Which is, again, another one, a common barrier to recovery. It just takes so darn long to get even just the body turned around, never mind having to deal with the behaviors and the underlying factors and our relationships. Just to get the body turned around just seems to take forever. Yeah. And another one too, that I think ties in with what you'd said, is there are going to be pressures from family and friends who don't want you to change or want you to take a different course of action, as you mentioned. Try this medication, or if you're not going to try the medication, I'm not going to talk to you. Or, this guy tried this thing, and if you're not going to do that, then, you can suffer with anxiety for the rest of your life. I don't care. You get those kind of pressures from people who aren't dealing with it, or aren't dealing with it the way that, you'd prefer to deal with it. So those pressures can also be a barrier, because those pressures can also lead to you questioning your own approach. And as you know, with recovery, we have to be committed to our approach and then follow the course of action to get results. If we're going to question as we go, it's just going to slow us down. So those are some of the other ones. Another one that sort of rang a bell when you were talking, Marguerite, is a martyr syndrome. And what I mean by that is we feel that we have to give ourselves away to make other people happy because that's our job. But you see, when it comes to recovery, we can't be like that, because we have to be selfish in terms of getting our recovery back on track. We have to say no to people's requests so that the body can heal. Now, there's, you can probably resonate with this, Marguerite. Marilyn often says, you have to learn to be a good patient. And that means all right, I'm in recovery, I'm the patient now, I need to do what I need to do to get better. And if other people are putting pressure on me, I just have to say no. And if they're disappointed, they're going to have to deal with the disappointment. Because we have to get to that place where our recovery matters, and we want to get through recovery sooner than later. We don't want to be doing this, for 10 years because we're putting everybody else before us because we just won't get better. So there is a time where we have to be a good patient, and that means following the required protocol to get better. Just some of the other ones.
I'm so glad you said that, because I've had 3 very tough conversations over the last couple weeks.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, of course, having those conversations, because confrontation is number 1 on my list. I mean, of course, having those conversations is extraordinarily stimulating. And of course, I brought on symptoms, but I just kept telling myself, at least these symptoms are worth it.
Yeah.
I mean, learning to, and even just, like you're saying, the martyr syndrome and just not wanting to disappoint people. And I don't know, almost thinking it's your Christian duty to be the martyr or whatever. But just telling people I can't, it's all I can do to go to therapy. And Stacy's a good therapist. He gives me lots of homework and keep my house clean, keep track of my 4 kids, my 2 dogs.
Yeah.
My husband's on the back burner.
Yeah. And those, and when you look at people who help people a lot, they're usually really good at self-care. That means they realize that in order for them to be helpful to others, they actually have to be healthy themselves. And so they take the time for good self-care. I have to say myself, I don't do such a good job. That's something I have to work at myself. But recognizing that.
So then you talk about having spikes of symptoms when you overdo it and you have to dial it down.
Yeah. This is where my passion to help others often supersedes the time I take to gear down. I love helping others. I love doing what we do. To me, this is what God sent me here to do. And I love doing it. I love serving God and I love helping people. But there are times when I push myself farther than I should. But then when I realize I've done that, I do take the time to back off. I need to get better at not getting to that place where I need to take the time to back off. But as you know, as you get older, I'm getting close to 69 now. My body just doesn't like the long hours anymore. It's letting me know sooner. So I'm having to work at adjusting my expectations to keep in line with what my body can manage. So that's an area that I certainly have to work at.
I'm with you there, Jim. I mean, I don't really see myself going back to the hospital. I don't think my nervous system can take it.
Yeah. But you have a big heart. I'm sure you'll find another way to build into other people's lives, but in a way that your body can manage.
I mean, just even the chaos, the noise at the hospital.
Yeah. I'm not sure that's an environment I'd want to ever go into. I mean, after Marilyn came out of it, and the conversations that I've had with her, and we have a family member who runs a major health division in our province. It's just, you're right. It's chaos and it's high stress, long hours. I think they have a terrible model for health, personally. We should go back to the days when it was more balanced and there was enough staff and you didn't have to run your feet off. I mean, Marilyn was telling me that sometimes she was 3 hours behind, meds because there was just so much demand on the time. So, yeah.
And I mean, I am a kidney nurse, and I told the nephrologist, I'm like, I just peed out what my patient is.
Yeah.
That's not healthy because I haven't ate, I haven't drank, I haven't sat down, and I find it interesting that, I get the back pain and the leg pain and all that kind of stuff. And just every time it flare, I'm just like, oh, I can't go back to the hospital because this is how I felt and I'd take pills and stuff and nothing. I mean, it just got to where nothing helped.
Yeah. And that's I think, kind of a symptom of the way our society has decayed so much, is that we're always trying to do more with less, but the body just wasn't designed to go at that pace. And so as people who are working through anxiety and want to stay healthy after the fact, we have to align ourselves with what the body can manage. And sometimes, as you know, our bodies may be more sensitive to stress than others. Typically, as some of the other calls I talked about, there's a high incidence of highly intellectual people who struggle with anxiety disorder. And, it's nice that the level of intellect is there. The bad part is that a lot of these people are really highly sensitized to stimulation. And so you can't be put in an environment where you're expected to meet the demands of someone who may not have that same level of sensory reception. And so we really have to find our place in the world in terms of where we can, first thing I'll do is identify what we're passionate about, and then find a place to exercise that passion, but in a way that's balanced, that's healthy for us. And that just means, again, being selfish about what we do with life. Another thing I wanted to mention too is a barrier, especially when it comes to making behavioral change, is family and friends who don't want you to change. For example, if we're the submissive one in a dominant relationship, well, the person who's dominant is very happy with the relationship, but we're not, because we're being anxious and stressed. So when we start to make behavioral change with healthy boundaries and moving to equality, that other person is not going to like it. And so you talked earlier about not having support, Marguerite. Well, there's a good example where that person is not only not going to support you, they don't want you to change. And they're going to do whatever it takes to keep you in that spot because it's comfortable for them, but that's not good for us. And so I've worked with several clients over the years where they were in that lopsided, unhealthy relationship where they were the submissive one because they came from a background where there was a dominant parent, and they were familiar with their relationship, so that was comfortable to them, but it was creating great anxiety. And so in a lot of cases, they really had to revolutionize their relationships in order for them to stay anxiety-free. So that's another common one, is where friends and family don't want to change.
The relationships are hard because I don't know if it's a curse or a gift, but my husband even talks about this. Man, people will tell me everything. And I just kind of become this toxic dumping ground.
Yeah.
I mean, friends from nursing school got diagnosed with cancer. Who do they call?
Yeah.
And I'm sorry for them, but I can't hear. I'm a highly sensitive person, and I can't just hear just the negative all the time. I just can't.
Yeah.
I even have a therapist friend that, we went to church or whatever, and then we went out to eat afterwards, and, she's crying in the car about her depression and all. And that's like, oh my stars. I just can't hear. I don't want to hear it right now. I have my own pile of mess I'm trying to navigate.
And this is, again, coming back to the being the martyr or the empathetic sponges, which a lot of us are because of our difficult backgrounds. But this is where we do have to exercise those healthy boundaries. And when a person starts to unload, it's fully within your responsibility to say, you know what, I really empathize with you, but I can't talk about this now. And I've had to set limits with my own family in those things because, they'll just come to you all the time. And again, our bodies and emotions weren't designed to take everybody else's things all the time. So we have to be able to set healthy boundaries to keep ourselves balanced.
And also be available to, my children.
Yep.
I still have 2 children at home, and
yeah,
it's been good for them having me at home.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, I'm sure they're loving it.
I don't know if they would say that, but my daughter's depression, I put her in counseling and worked with her on her depression. I've worked with I've worked with all 4 of my kids because of my work I'm doing here at Anxiety Center, but I can't do that with everybody. And I feel like I have to prioritize, and, my kids, that's where I feel like I have to spend my emotional energy right now because I don't have a lot, Jim.
Yeah. Well, good for you. That's perfect. I mean, going through and establishing your priorities and being a mom, of course, your family's going to be your priority, and it should be, I think. But being a mom, you have to set those limits. So when other people come to you, you have to set that boundary. The other thing that's important too is a lot of us don't keep a reserve. And what I mean by that is that we'll spend our emotional self so much that there's no reserve. So if something extra comes along, we just don't have the resources to deal with it. So it's important, even though we may feel that we're in a good place, we always want to keep in mind, now, do I have enough reserve should something more significant come my way? So trying to live your life by, giving yourself as much as you think, but also making sure you have a reserve.
Yeah, Caroline Leaf talks about that, having an insurance account.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's how she explains it. But yeah, I mean, not just taking myself to the utter brink.
Yep. Kayla Neese is a good one to follow for sure. Yeah, I like her materials. And one of the other barriers that we often see is the stimulation coming from our everyday life circumstances. Because here we are trying to recover, trying to get the nervous system geared down, trying to desensitize our senses so we can get everything settled, yet we still have to live life. And if you're, in a young family, you have children, you have job responsibilities, it's tough to carve out the time to work at recovery, yet keep plugged into life so things don't fall apart. And so again, that's a common barrier we see. So,
that's why I had to quit working, because Stacy, he said it's, you're bailing water out one side, but it's just coming in faster on the other side.
Yeah.
And even just the way our society is set up, everybody's got the cell phone. We're hooked to that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's in our face.
Yeah.
Just even going to eat at a restaurant. Like I went out to eat with my son, and it was wonderful. Everything was great, but the music was so damn loud. I couldn't even hardly hear myself think.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and that's just the culture we live in. I don't know about Canada or Australia or China, but here in the States, you go into, everything is just, if you go into a sports bar, they have 10 TVs on. If you go into a rest or a sports restaurant or whatever, literally 10 TVs will be on. Or if you go into, like I said, even Chipotle, the music's so loud, it just rattles your ears. You can't hear the person in front of you.
Yeah.
The grocery store is the same way. I told you last time I recently started going back to the grocery store, and I was like, okay, what day is the slowest day? And the music, it's crazy busy. And I don't know why they do this, because during the weekdays, they don't play the music. But on the weekends, when the place is jam-packed, crazy, they have this big speaker, loud as can be. It's just, we get in our cars, we drive really fast.
Yeah.
Just even having my kids home, the one's got their music going, they've got their music going. Tim's, my husband's got the TV going, and I'm like, this just, you know what I mean? But all that, because you talk about or maybe Stacy talks a lot about, the cup filling up with stress, filling up with stress, filling up with stress, well, that's all filling up the cup.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then the ads, it's just the culture, I read a statistic that we see more ads in a day than a person in 1910 saw in a lifetime.
Yeah. 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 And all that's certainly true. We're just being bombarded by so much information and stimulation. Yeah.
And then coping with, I can't handle all the stimulation, and people, don't understand, or I don't want to say they give you a hard time, but you're kind of just different, Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's not such a big deal when our bodies are healthy, because we can take it. But when the body's hyperstimulated, oh my. Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah.